In this video, we're going to be looking some more at zeros and factors. Problem number 1 says to determine the real zeros and the factors of the polynomial graphed below. Real zeros are your x-intercepts. So here at -4, -1, 2, and 6. Once I know what my zeros are, now I can determine my factors. So there are my factors. Problem 2, using a graphing calculator, find the real zeros and the factors of the function. So here I can see that I've typed my equation into my calculator, and there's actually a couple of things that I can do here. I can look at the graph or I can look at my table, and we're going to look at both real quick. It looks like my graph is crossing at the origin and then at 2 and then again at 4. And I can double check that by looking at the table. So I can see that I have the point 0, 0, 2, 0, and 4, 0. Where my y values are zeros, that's where I have real zeros. So my real zeros are 0, 2, and 4. As a matter of fact, those are my only zeros that I have. And we're going to talk later about how I can tell whether I have all of my zeros by looking at my x-intercepts. The next thing I'm going to do in this problem is to find the factors. So I have x minus 0, x minus 2, and x minus 4. But x minus 0 is just x. So there are my factors. Problem 3, find all the real zeros of the polynomial function. Hint, use your graphing calculator. So I've already entered my function into my calculator. One thing I want you to notice is that I have degree 3 in this polynomial. So I know that I'm going to have 3 zeros. And I can tell by looking at my graph, I've got 3 x-intercepts. Those are all zeros. So all 3 of my zeros are going to correspond with those 3 x-intercepts. So don't have any non-real zeros. So I can look at my graph to figure out my x-intercepts and figure out those zeros. And to me, this graph's a little hard to read. So what I'm going to do instead is look at the table. So second graph will get me my table. And I can see that I have a 0 at 5. I've got the 0.50. And then I also have a 0 at -1. I want to look at this table a little bit closer. Notice I have the point 0, 10, and I have the point 1, -24. So my y value here is 10. My y value here is -24. The only way my graph can go from being positive to being negative is it has to pass through 0. So I know that there is a 0 in between 0 and 1. And again, to me, that's a little bit hard to see from my graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on that by changing the window. I'm going to have my window go from, say, -2 to +2. And let's go to 0.5 there. And let's have my y values stay the same. And then let's see what happens there. Okay, so I can see my graph a little bit easier here. So what I want to do is find out what this 0 is over here that's in between 0 and 1. So I'm going to hit second calc, and I want to find the 0. So I'm going to scroll down there to option 2. And notice up at the top of my screen, I've got my function entered. And I am asked for the left bound. Now, I should have a cursor in here. It's hard to see, but I can tell by looking at the bottom of my screen exactly where my cursor is. So now I can see my cursor on my screen. It's up here near the top of the graph, and it's got that little blinking light. So let me move this a little bit closer to the x-axis. So this is still to the left of my 0. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Now it's asking me for the right bound. So I'm going to use my arrow here, scroll over. So now I am to the right of my 0 and press enter. Notice at the top of my calculator screen, there's these 2 arrows. This is saying I have a 0 that's in between those 2 arrows. And from the bottom of my screen, it's asking me to guess. Just press enter. So my 0 is 0.4. So what I'm going to do is go back to my home screen, and I'm going to change that decimal to a fraction, 2/5. So now I have my zeros. I can find my factors. So there are my factors. All right, I want to look at a different way of finding the zeros for this problem. I'm going to start the problem off the same way. I'm going to use my graph here, and I can tell I have a 0 at -1 and 5. If it's hard to tell from your graph, again, you can go to your table. See, I've got a 0 at -1 and a 0 at 5. The 0 that's a fraction is the one that I still need to find. Because I know that -1 is a 0, I can use synthetic division. And I get this for my answer, 5x squared minus 27x plus 10. Now notice that right here I have 0. And you have to be sure that you have a 0 here because you're told by looking at your graph that -1 is a 0. So if you don't have a 0 here, you've done something wrong. Okay. Once I have factored out that factor of x plus 1, then I can do synthetic division again with 5, but I'm using this equation right here for my synthetic division. And notice again, I have 0 here for my remainder, so I know that that's a 0. So my quotient here is 5x minus 2. So from there, I can set this equal to 0, so 5x equals 2, x equals 2/5. So going back up to the top here to list out my 0, my third 0 is 2/5. Notice that right here I have one of my factors as 5x minus 2. So there are my factors. Now this particular problem didn't ask you to find the factors, but there will be some problems where you're asked to find both the zeros and the factors. In this problem, I'm given that 3 plus I is the 0 of the function, and I'm asked to find the other zeros. The first thing I want you to notice about this problem is that all of my coefficients are integers, so when that happens, I can apply the conjugate theorem. The conjugate theorem is on your reference sheet, and it tells you that if 3 plus I is a 0, then 3 minus I is also going to be a 0. Using my graphing calculator, I can see that the other 0 is 4. One thing I want to point out here is the directions asked me to find the other zeros. So be sure that when you type this into your answer into MyMathLab, you're just typing these other 2 zeros that you're having to find. You're not typing in that first 0 that was given to you in the original problem. Problem 5, given that 2 is a 0 of the function, find the remaining zeros. Now from my graph, I can verify that 2 is a 0. But I don't see any other real zeros or x-intercepts on my graph. And there's a couple of things that could be going on here. My window could be just set to where that I cannot see the other real zeros, or my other zeros may not be real at all. And in this case, they're not going to be. So what I'm going to do here is to use synthetic division with 2 because I know that 2 is a 0. And again, I'm supposed to have 0 here for my remainder because I'm told that 2 is a 0. If you don't have 0 here, then you've done something wrong. Okay, now I started off with my function being of degree 3. I need to go down to x squared. So this is my quotient. Now I'm asked to find the remaining zeros. So that means when does this equal 0? Well, this is a quadratic equation, and I can try to factor it or to use the quadratic formula. This is not going to be able to be factored, so I need to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so using the quadratic formula, I get down to this last step here. So dividing everything by 2, I get 3 plus or minus 2i. My math lab will want you to write those answers separately, 3 plus 2i and 3 minus 2i. Problem 6. Given that negative 3 is a 0 of the function, find the other zeros. So looking at my graph, I can tell that I have a real 0 somewhere around negative 3 and then another real 0 around positive 3. And looking at my table, I can tell that I do have a 0 at negative 3. And I have another 0 that's in between positive 2 and positive 3. So what I'm going to do here is to use synthetic division. My graph is really not helping me very much on this problem. So I'm going to use synthetic division. So I have x squared plus 0x minus 7. Now I don't really need that 0x, so I have x squared minus 7 is my quotient. I'm asked to find the other zero, so that means when does this equal 0? So this is an equation I can solve by isolating my variable, take the square root of both sides, so I have positive and negative square root of 7. Problem 7, given that 7 is a 0 of the function, find the other zeros. That is, solve f of x equals 0. Now I can use my graphing calculator to help me with this, but it's really not going to give me the information that I need. The only thing it's going to do is tell me that I do have my other 2 zeros to be real zeros. So I'm just going to go ahead and start off by using synthetic division. So my quotient is x squared minus 4x minus 7. I'm asked to find my other zeros. That means when is this equal to 0? So I'm going to use the quadratic formula to solve that equation. Okay, so from here, I need to try to simplify that square root, find the biggest perfect square that goes into 44. So the biggest perfect square that goes into 44 is 4. So I've rewritten 44 as 4 times 11. Now I'm going to take the square root of 4, which is 2. And simplifying this, I get 2 plus or minus square root of 11. Given 2 is a 0, find the remaining zeros. Now, as a first step, you may want to put this in the calculator and look at your graph and see if you have your graph crossing at an integer, or look at your table to see if you can easily find your zeros there, and you're not going to be able to. So we need to use synthetic division. So my quotient is x squared minus 8x plus 32. If I want to find the remaining zeros, I need to set that equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to use the quadratic formula. And there are my answers.